Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from The Athletic. He is useful human Arif Hassan. Arif, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I am not as hungry as you are, apparently.
Yeah. Well, I didn't eat, so we spent the first, 15 minutes just listening to me eat?
we were throwing around the idea of having a show of just, me asking hard-hitting Vikings questions like we would have on the show, or taping a regular show and then just replacing your voice with the sound of a crinkling bag of Cheez-Its or potato chips, and just seeing if anyone really notices. Just as avant-garde as possible for a Norse Code episode. Just seeing if that ends up going crinkle, crinkle, crinkle. Yeah, but Tom Johnson is a good fit for this offense. Crinkle, crinkle, crinkle. I will not shut up about this.
It's a commentary on the nature of contemporary sports commentary.
Exactly. We're just delving as far deep into this whole podcast thing as we can. It's the 5th season. We got to get weird with it. So, welcome to Norse Code. We've got plenty to talk about, including the tie in Green Bay, which was as weird and off-putting as it could have possibly been. And apparently there was only one penalty in the entire game. So, good for them. That's the only one anyone's talking about anyway. So we have plenty to talk about there. We're going to be talking about Dan Bailey and Tom Johnson. That's the late breaking news that Tom Johnson is once again a Minnesota Viking, and the mailbag. But before we do, I want to again thank you guys so much for listening and spreading the news about Norse Code and helping donate to the show, helping keep us ad free and all that. So if you would like to donate to the show, you can do so in one of two different ways. You can go to patreon.com/Norse Code. That's more of a monthly subscription model, or you can go to paypal.me/Norse Code and you can donate there. Those who were entered in the drawing, I did contact the winners over the last couple days, and I will be sending that out here shortly. So there are 2 signed Kyle Sloter rookie cards in the mix here too. So out of the winners, 2 of you will be getting Kyle Sloter signed cards. You know what's crap is, you know who got one of them? Don from Ohio.
No.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Don got one, so just wanted to just mention that one of them is taken, and I assume that will just adorn the shrine in his home that to Kyle Sloter that looks something along the lines of Sirianno in Major League when he has his Jobu statue and everything and the rum. I assume his shrine to Kyle Sloter looks something like that. I like the idea of him lighting incense and trying to get him on the team or try to convince Zimmer otherwise. No drink Jobu rum. So we got plenty of stuff to talk about with the show, so let's get right into the meat and potatoes of this, and we get to talk about the tie. The big news coming out of this, and we're just going to hit this right away, is the Clay Matthews penalty, which extended the drive for the Vikings and led to the score. Part of me wants to write this off as Green Bay complaining that the rules actually apply to them now. Part of me wants to say it was your quarterback who complained for 6 months about the hit, and thus a rule was created. And part of me wants to just, enjoy the poetic justice about all this. So, all of that said, why are the Green Bay fans so annoying?
I think it's because of what has been constituted as the normal for them. For the Vikings, not having the quarterback you intended to have at the beginning of the season, that's fairly typical, right?
When you have it's a blessing. You just, oh my God, between this and the Lefse, week 1 is great.
Yeah, right, exactly. I feel for Packers fans, they went through an Ironman with Brett Favre. They had Aaron Rodgers, and he played for most of every season except this last one. It's got a sting, right? And so they've got this like level of frustration and disappointment that they typically just don't have.
How dare we experience the same thing that the other 31 teams in the league experience? How dare us?
I mean, like, how annoying, A, are New England fans in general, but B, were they right after Tom Brady went down and, Matt Castle led them to like an 11-win season. And
still didn't make the playoffs.
Right, yeah. So, yeah, I feel like all of that is like part of the reason it's just like so obnoxious. But like nationally, it also became the story where it's like the Clay Matthews hit that extended the drive that allowed the Vikings to put together the go-ahead, not really go-ahead, but the tying score that allowed them to, go into. And it's just like, yeah, that happened at like the end of the game. So it's like a higher leverage penalty. But what's weird is that not only did the NFL decide, actually, that is a penalty and it wasn't poorly called. It's so not a penalty that it's going on the teaching tape we're sending out about how not to hit the quarterback. It's super not a penalty, or it's super a penalty. It's textbook penalty. Eat it, I guess, is the way the NFL is treating, which is also weird. Like, I prefer like none of those things be called, but yeah, whatever.
Just looking at it, it amused me greatly that it affected it, A, because of the hit and the penalty that happened much earlier in the game that negatively affected the Vikings, which led to a touchdown. But if this led to like the abolition of the rule, like this killed it. Just you live by Green Bay and you die by Green Bay. Apparently in the league, just everybody gets to complain about this. Like, this was such a horrible call. Yes, but it was legal. Yeah, or yes, but it was illegal and it needed to happen. Yeah, but this is such bullcrap. Okay, well let's just rescind it. If this hit actually like got rid of this rule, the way that it's being called right now, I'm not saying that I'd buy a Clay Matthews jersey. I would just stop making fun of him for at least 4 weeks.
Yeah, that's fair. I think 4 weeks is probably the right.
I think that's an appropriate gift.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's just like incredible, right? So like after the game, like a bunch of Packers fans wanted to talk about the penalty. And it's just like, or just the refereeing in general. And it's like, let's have a discussion about it. I thought the refereeing was actually fairly poor, and or the nature of the rules made it so that the officiating in the game really dragged things down. But like they were just like, that OPI, Geronimo Allison, that would have led to a touchdown, which is like a weird thing that like you don't know that. Like the Vikings also had like 3 and outs too, like in the game. Like you don't know that Geronimo Allison getting that, but sure, fine, okay. It would have led to a touchdown, and the Clay Matthews penalty, and is it like the penalty that took away, I think, the Jimmy Graham touchdown, and they didn't call the pass interference on Ben Gedeon, and so on. So there's like a bunch of like they have like their list of grievances that they went through to like indicate that the refereeing was like biased against the Packers, which is really weird because I saw a bunch of early in the game comments about how it was like biased for the Packers. Obviously, most of my feed's Vikings fans, so they're more likely to say that. But there was like a bunch of things like the Kendricks hit was just like the exact same as the Clay Matthews hit, I guess just as legal in either direction. So you argue that the Clay Matthews hit shouldn't have happened, then maybe we should let the Eric Kendricks hit stay or whatever. That one's, I guess, a little bit more complicated from a results perspective because that would have been an offside, so it would have been 5 yards. But automatic first down plus 15 yards is a lot. It hurts a lot more than 5 yards. So there was that, and I mean there's a number of penalties that it just felt like went against the Vikings, right? So it's just like weird that. That the story of the game is this Clay Matthews hit ends up taking stuff away from the Packers who like had this like right to win the game off of that interception or whatever, when there was just a bunch of bad calls throughout the game that impacted both teams. And it's just like weird to me to think, definitely one of the teams. Yeah, it hurt one of the teams more. It's like, well, I mean, there was like 8 calls. There's no way we can like. I'm uncomfortable like litigating a game over one call because of the butterfly effect. Like you can't really predict what would have happened. But when it's like 8 calls, it's just like whatever. That sucks.
But don't let the penalty distract you from the fact that Daniel Carlson missed 3 field goals, 2 of which would have been potential game winners. Well, both of them actually would have been game winners. So let's not distract ourselves from the real story of the game. On a related note, Daniel Carlson was released on Monday. When asked for comment, Mike Zimmer said, quote, "Did you see the game?"
Yeah. There was a follow-up question. Hey, was it difficult to come to this? Yeah, it was pretty easy.
Yeah, it was pretty easy. Like, ouch.
Wow.
Yeah, that's I can't imagine wanting to be Mike Priefer in any sort of situation, but this could not have been a very fun little ride home. So we'll talk more about Dan Bailey and our former kicker who shall not be named at this particular moment. We'll talk more about him later. Let's go into the game. And the first half really felt like Green Bay was getting the best of us. And I don't even mean like defense to our offense. A little bit there. But it looked like their offensive line was just chewing apart the Vikings' defensive line. Didn't make any sense.
I think so. So after the first drive where I think they ended up getting a sack, they got a couple of pressures, it really felt like the only times the Vikings could get pressure was when they could force Rodgers into the situations where he had to hold on to the ball a little bit longer. And even then, it just felt like there wasn't a ton happening. Sheldon Richardson's a bit of an anomaly in that respect. He ended up getting a lot of pressure in the game. But Linval Joseph didn't get any pressure, which, for nose tackles, that's not unusual. But for Linval Joseph, it is pretty unusual. Hunter was okay. Everson Griffin was a little less than okay. And that's very unusual, right, for the Vikings, because that defensive line is kind of what's supposed to provide the foundation for a defense that's going to take them to the Super Bowl. So, yeah, it was really annoying and obnoxious, especially after seeing what the Bears defensive line did to that offensive line. I think a lot of Vikings fans were kind of salivating after watching that game, and there wasn't a ton that happened. Like if you go back and count. There's actually, a number is like 4 sacks, right? Which that's not bad to have, but it just felt like that wasn't there, probably because there were so many plays in the game that, and so many plays where you just didn't have any pressure at all, that in the end, it just felt like there wasn't a lot happening. And typically the Vikings are better than average against the Packers offensive line, against other teams than they are worse. But in this case, it just felt kind of mediocre, I guess.
It was. I think the reason why it feels so underwhelming is simply because it felt like there should have been more. Like we should have been able to get to the quarterback easier. This is not the greatest offensive line in the league. Meanwhile, they looked like it for at least a quarter and a half there, where we were barely able to get to a guy who at first didn't look like he was going to be able to run at all. I think if we were looking at a percentage-wise of how much of Aaron Rodgers was, out there and able to play, you'd be looking at between 80 and 85%. Like he wasn't doing much scrambling, but he could still run and did in fact run at one point. He did exactly what we expected. There were quick releases, and when he held on for just a hair too long, he was swallowed up or having to throw it away. The bigger thing out of this is the continued torture of the tight ends. In this case, Jimmy Graham was lighting up the Vikings pretty well. And we actually had a question about this, and I wanted to hit this now as opposed to later. Kenneth Allen had wrote in, is Graham still good, or do we really have a problem with tight ends? Which Arif take is wrong? So Arif, which of your takes is wrong here?
That's a good point. I wasn't that impressed with Jimmy Graham coming into the season. I didn't expect him to have a big season for the Packers. So far, he's been doing pretty well. Ended up getting a good chunk of yardage against the Vikings. So it's the thing about, are the Vikings good against against tight ends? Are they bad against tight ends? I don't know that I'm wrong about that, because I've been super hedgy about that, right? Where I said, hey, last year...
I swear to God, if you're going to say something along the lines of, well, I'd be wrong about the tight end thing, but the sample size just isn't big enough.
No. Like last week when people kind of brought this up, I said, hey, I've kind of been worried about tight end matchups against the Vikings for a while. I probably shouldn't be, because last year the Vikings were number 2 against tight ends and like fantasy points given up in DVOA and stuff like that. They were really good against tight ends last year, so they should in theory be good this year. But every year I just can't shake the feeling that the Vikings are vulnerable to tight ends. So in that sense, I don't have to thread a needle here. I'm not like wrong in 2 separate ways. I just my instinct that the Vikings will struggle against tight ends was kind of true. Mike Zimmer ended up saying that the issues that the Vikings had with George Kittle were not the issues that the Vikings had with Jimmy Graham. So if Kenneth Allen wants to make that my take, that's not right. That's Mike Zimmer's take. His argument was more that Kittle was kind of schemed open, essentially. And, we've seen kind of a succession of plays where they run zone, then they run zone action, then they run zone action with a small twist, and they run that again. And then they run zone action where the tight end ends up wheeling up, and the tight end is way open because they've kind of tricked or lulled the defense into thinking that, it's going to be 1 or 2 of these things, and it was this third thing. Whereas Jimmy Graham just beat Mackenzie Alexander, and Mackenzie Alexander was kind of peeking into the backfield. It still isn't an indication that the Vikings are good or bad against tight ends, because both of these don't seem to be matchup issues. They both seem to be issues that are either very likely kind of easily correctable with Mackenzie Alexander, or are just products of the offensive coordinator, and Kyle Shanahan is / head coach, and Kyle Shanahan is kind of like a top 5, top 3 offensive play caller in the NFL. So it's not likely that that's going to continue to be a thing, nor is it tight end specific. Like 1 week it could just be like, hey, we think, we're going to scheme Mike Wallace open or whatever. So, that's he doesn't play for the 49ers, but you know what I'm getting at. I was thinking like other top offensive minds, probably Doug Peterson, Eagles. I think Mike Wallace plays for the Eagles now. Yes. So I don't know that there's enough evidence to say they're bad against tight ends. But I will say this is actually consistent with my prior take, not in opposition to my prior take.
So in case you were curious and kind of got lost
I'm right
in the
again.
there,
That's what I'm saying.
Yes.
Arif is right. Let's keep this up.
Two wrongs made a reef. So we are going to continue on here. So Kirk Cousins, this was an interesting performance, and the first 2 quarters, he had a couple of nice little moments, but he really shined in the 3rd and 4th quarters, especially the 4th. It's almost to the point where you can feel like you can trust him while you're down on points. Is this a fair assessment? And what happened in the first couple of quarters?
Yeah, so I thought the offense overall struggled for the first, not just 2, but also the 3rd quarter as well. I mean, they only scored 7 points. It wasn't until the end of the 3rd quarter that they really got things moving. And so then, of course, by the time the 4th quarter started, they were in scoring position and scored. But there were a lot of things, right? So some of it, I think, has to do with the play calling. I thought that the play calling was kind of unusually cautious. And it led to I think, a poor 2-minute drive, and it just kind of didn't kind of unleash the talent gap that the Vikings offensive skill players have over the Packers defensive secondary. You kind of expect, hey, Dalvin Cook gets to line up against these linebackers like Corey Toomer, right? Like not their backup linebacker, but their backup linebacker. And you didn't, see as much of that as you kind of maybe expected. And you didn't get to see, in the first half anyway, a ton of, Rudolph versus, Clinton Dix or whatever, right? So some of that's the play calling. Some of that was kind of the offensive line, which I thought played a lot better than I think people are giving it credit for. And then I guess the PFF grades came out and they essentially all played well except for one of them. But you could say a lot of their improvement occurred in the second half, whereas in the first half they were a little bit more likely to give up pressure, and I would agree with that. Also, there was just communication problems everywhere. There was the deep throw to no one, which that's a Thielen Diggs Cousins thing. It sounded like that from what I heard, that it sounded like that was maybe more Cousins' fault. We saw other kinds of miscommunication errors pop up. We saw a bad snap from Brett Jones that led to kind of a hurried play from Cousins, and it's kind of exactly where you don't want him to be. There was like an open Adam Thielen on a scramble. There was a bunch of kind of unusually poor stuff from the offense that a lot of people were at fault. Cousins, I think, is one of them, and that's kind of how the whole. I'm just going to talk about it now, I guess.
Go for it.
Yeah. Okay. So Cousins ends up making like a pretty poor decision. I forget what precisely the play was, but it was after kind of a series of offensive failures, and I think. I think it had occurred after the Brett Jones snapped the ball too early thing, and it occurred after the play following that, and I think that was like a punt, and so it was like the drive after that or something along those lines. And Cousins had made like another mistake. Maybe it was the deep shot to no one. Maybe it was kind of missing, on the scramble. And there were smaller mistakes too. He like mistimed a couple of screens and led receivers the wrong way. So I tweeted out, "Oh, Cousins is a work in progress." It seems like it was kind of sarcastic, not like sarcastic as in I didn't mean it, but like sarcastic as in this is clearly more meant as a lighthearted thing than it is like meant as like wow, Cousins is in huge trouble sort of thing. So I tweet that out, and it's like fine when I tweet it, like thousands of people saw the tweet and moved on, right? Maybe that's kind of overestimating my reach on game days, but whatever, right? A bunch of people saw the tweet and moved on. At the same time, the other beat writers are tweeting out very similar stuff, like the offense isn't in sync. Cousins made a mistake there, and probably shouldn't have held on to the ball too long, that sort of stuff. And it's like Cousins needs to get things together. Okay, cool. And then the fourth quarter happens. The Vikings put up friggin' 22 points in the fourth quarter, including just like this astounding, 2-point conversion situation to tie up the game. And then they go into overtime and they tie the game. And Cousins plays really well. And kind of his receivers are the ones that fail him by the end, as well as the kicker. And a couple of people then favorite that tweet from like halftime, right? That Cousins is a work in progress. I'm like, yeah, fair enough. That's kind of funny. But I think because people favorited it, it showed up in a bunch of people's, in case you missed it, the non-chronological timeline stuff. Or, sometimes it's not even in the in case you missed it, right? It's just the way Twitter does it, is that if a bunch of people like a tweet, it'll show up like 4 hours later in your feed. And so I think people just kind of assumed that was my takeaway from the whole game, and that A, it was like a conclusion that I had made about the game, or B, that I was like definitive about this, as in, this is the biggest like problem going forward, or that Cousins is like doomed, or the offense is like poor. The thing is, immediately after I kind of tweeted that, halftime starts, and then partway through halftime, I'm like, actually, I think the Vikings can probably come back from this deficit. I'm worried about the sloppiness, but I think they can come back from the deficit. So I'm not even like thinking that the offense is doomed or anything like that. And a bunch of people are tweeting that like, I'm a moron, I'm an idiot. What do you mean he's a work in progress? Didn't you just see what just happened? Do you feel like you've been proven wrong? Or you're just putting a take out there to get clicks, which like I don't have an article linked. I don't know what you click.
These takes are supposed to inspire people to go to theathletic.com and buy memberships.
Yeah, that's how clickbait works. Yeah.
That's how they're thinking. People are going to put down their hard-earned money because they're annoyed with you, so they can go onto that website, pay money to access the articles, and then go to the comments section and then just ream you.
Yeah, I don't. So people accused like me of like doing the athletic thing of Skip Baylessing takes, and like I don't think that is an athletic thing. I think it's the opposite of what. And I work for the company, so I'm going to defend it. But like the Skip Bayless business model doesn't like work for a subscription service because you don't get hate buys. Like
yeah, there are no such thing as hate buys. You can get hate clicks, but
yeah, you get hate clicks, hate views. They still watch ads, right? But like
they don't exactly like make it to the website and then go, all right, I have to sit down and subscribe. Where's my credit card? Like I have to sit down. I am gonna just angrily type in this credit card number. Like no, it doesn't work like that. Or I'm completely wrong, and this is how the real world works. Maybe that's how people donate to our Patreon. They're so annoyed with us that they want to give us money to help us continue to do the show.
Right, and then so that would be great.
We will, for the record, we will totally take that.
Yeah, please hate donate. PayPal.me/Norse Code. But I aggravated the situation in a big way because I just kind of go off on Twitter. And like a bunch of people responding to this tweet, should I contextualize it? And in my head, I was like, no, that's not going to help. But also I was just like, yeah, but someone's wrong on the internet. Let's go. And so,
oh no.
Yeah. And so I just like, I tweeted for like hours. Well, it seems like hours. Mostly I was like writing my athletic piece so the piece I'm going to write is about breaking down every touchdown, both scored by both teams. But I'm like doing screen capture and writing up that stuff. But every 5 minutes, I'm like hopping over to Twitter and, responding to something or saying this or saying that. And it just got like out of control. And of course, by like defending myself, it makes it look like I'm focusing on some version of not even the take that I had, but some version of that take, right? Where, they're like, hey, so some people are like, do you still believe this? And I was like, well, at the time it was true. So like, yes, I believe that, he was struggling. That was a work in progress and the offense needs to get in sync. And that's an issue kind of going forward. And people are like, why are you so focused on the first half? Can't you just accept that he played really well? And it's like, yeah, he had a phenomenal game. Like when you put it like together, like if it was a report card, right, he would get like an A, right? But if you just graded him at halftime, maybe he gets like a B-, right? The stuff that led to that B- is probably impactful, and it's kind of worth talking about. And I bet the Vikings, will sit down with them in the quarterback room and say, "Hey, you need to do this. You need to do this. The offense isn't on the same page. It's either on the receivers or it's on you. Let's talk about how to fix that." But like that's pretty normal, right? Because there's a ton of throws that he wanted to like. He had like another like 3 incompletions in a row or something like that, or 5. Incompletions in a row, and he just did the streaky thing, right? Where he started the game off with 10 straight completions, not great completions. There were a bunch of them were really short, a bunch of them were not led well to the receiver. Those are the mistimed screens that I'm talking about to Diggs and Cook. He ends up getting 24 yards that are produced entirely by Cook, his yards per attempt is under 7. That's not great. His completion rate is like 60, so it's not bad, but it's not great either. The first half, like his numbers are poor, and it's not because of the receivers failing him. It's because he wasn't being very aggressive. He wasn't looking at open receivers downfield. He was like missing all these shots downfield. A bunch of stuff happened. He had 6.9 yards per attempt. #nice. And so I talked about all of those things. Like, yeah, it was true at the time. Like, I don't know why you're saying it's not true at the time. Like, it ended up not being true by the end of the game, but like players changed their level of performance throughout the game. It's like a normal thing to do, right? Like that nobody plays like Daniil Hunter doesn't get exactly a quarter of a pressure on every single play, right? Like that doesn't make sense. Like there's ebbs and flows. And that's what happened with the Vikings offense, and it's particularly what happened with Kirk Cousins. So in the end, he ended up having a very good game. But at the time, he didn't. So I'm talking about this a lot, and people are like, why are you focusing so much on the first half? Well, because people are asking me about a thing that I said during the first half. Like, what do you expect me to do? Which is my fault, right? Because like the more I tweet about it, the more people are talking. I mean, it just got out of control. And a bunch of people tweeted at me with like good advice, like, hey, block these people. They don't even follow you. They're not that interested in talking to you. Or, hey, you bringing this up is hurting you more, and it's making more people kind of misunderstand what you're doing. Or, hey, it's been 8 hours. Are you okay?
Actually, that one wasn't a tweet. That was just your girlfriend knocking on the door as you were like shaking and holding your phone like, but they're still wrong.
Right. So, yeah. And then honestly, I was kind of annoyed. Sorry, Don, I'm going to call you out. Don from Ohio and Andy Carlson, both of them, they do this thing where they intentionally mischaracterize my takes. And most of the time it's like kind of funny. But like, still like 10% of their followers think that it's serious. Eric Thompson did this too, man. Screw you, Eric. Where they like intentionally mischaracterized my tweet because it's like a funny joke, right? But then people were like, "Oh my God, I can't believe he said that!" Like, and now I'm dealing with this, and I'm like already in like a bad headspace because I'm dealing with all these people, and now like other people that like I know have followers are like tweeting it, and I'm like, I know they don't mean it, but like. It's just putting more fuel on the fire because like they're filling my mentions, and then the people, because I'm tagged in those tweets, the people who have never seen my tweet now see it, and now they're also commenting because I have to deal with them too. And I'm just like, guys, it's funny most of the time. Just like, please not today.
I'm gonna say this. I say this all the time to just about everybody I meet. What did you learn from this exchange? What did you learn that day?
That my New Year's resolution is bad, but I kind of already knew that.
Okay, just want to double check that, yeah.
But for the uninitiated, my New Year's resolution was to get involved in more internet fights.
It's a darn shame. It was going so well. So... Yeah.
So, yeah, the offense struggled in the first half. That was an issue. The defense struggled, too. And it's difficult to say. The special teams also struggled. I don't know if anyone noticed that. The defense had...
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Yeah, so let's talk about the defense real quick. The defense had issues in the first half. In the second half, they closed down on almost all of these issues, except for some of the ones in coverage. But they had issues bringing down ball carriers. They had tackling issues. Eric Hendricks played a pretty poor game, which is actually, it's interesting. Now, it's 2 straight games where I think Eric Hendricks has played pretty poorly. One more game, and it's kind of maybe worth a discussion, right? But yeah, he missed tackles. He got blown off of blocks in the run game. He wasn't getting to the spot quickly enough. He ended up, putting together some pretty good plays by the second half. But in the first half, it was a really big issue. Anthony Barr misaligned at least once. That was a problem. Yeah, there were big problems on the defense and stuff that you typically don't expect because you've got like these Pro Bowl quality linebackers, these All Pro quality defensive linemen, and they're getting cracked open in the run game. It was really weird. That contributed a lot, I think, to the issues. And then special teams. Ugh.
Well, let's talk about 2 plays specific. Actually, let's talk about 3 because they were all touchdowns. And the first thing I want to talk about is Laquan Treadwell, who finally got a touchdown. The joke last week was that Mike Hughes got his first touchdown before Laquan Treadwell did. But Treadwell was useful here for a little bit and then kind of fell off a cliff.
Yeah, so because we know that interceptions are worse than touchdowns are good, right? Interceptions are worth twice as much to the defense as touchdowns are worth to the offense, plus a little more. That would mean that Treadwell had a net negative day, which I don't think anyone would ever disagree with. But yeah, it was like, and the touchdown was like fun and nifty, right? Because I think it meant that Treadwell had, what happened was that he ran a post route, and Clinton Dix thought he was running, I think, a corner route or was running just straight up ahead upfield, and he saw that Cousins was already loaded and ready to throw the ball, and he tried to jump the route, and he jumped the wrong route. And so Treadwell ends up getting wide open on the post in the end zone. And I think that was an option route where I think so Cousins. So we actually had Brett Coleman tweet at us. He was like, "Hey, did you notice this?" So Cousins notices after the hard count. So he does the hard count, and the safeties rotate after the hard count. And that kind of reveals that the safety look that he was getting beforehand, which I think looked like a 2 high look, is now a 1 high look. And that changes Treadwell's route. So he signals to Treadwell to change his route. And I think he gave Treadwell the option, essentially, which I think if it's a short route, this is called a choose route, but it's a deeper route, to change his angle based off of what the safety was doing. And the safety was closing down hard, so he cuts inside as opposed to going straight upfield or outside. And Cousins throws exactly where he expects Treadwell to be. They read the defense the exact same way. Really good stuff, and that means Treadwell kind of made a route adjustment that's really good. And that's a good change from the San Francisco game where he jumps in front of a pass intended for somebody else by running the wrong route. In this game, I don't know that there's much evidence that he ran any wrong routes, and he made a good decision in route running early in the game, and then everyone's happy. He got his touchdown. Maybe he could turn out to be that red zone threat, and he just basically almost throws away the game. If the defense wasn't spectacular following that, and Mike McCarthy didn't screw up just an absolute gift, that would have been it. Which, you can point to a lot of things, right? If Stacey Coley hauls that ball in, then that they're probably fine anyway. Or if Jair Alexander holds on to the ball that Stacey Coley should have hauled, whatever, right? But still, Treadwell hurt, I think, more than he helped, despite the fact that we saw a pretty good sign.
I believe I read this on Twitter, and if not, this is a fantastic, wonderful take of my own, but I'm fairly confident this was somebody else's, that I could not have imagined that the game that Laquan Treadwell scores his first touchdown is the game where everyone's calling for his head.
Yeah, right. This is the game that everyone's done with him. Yeah.
This is it, huh? All right. Next touchdown I want to talk about is the Diggs touchdown, the long Diggs touchdown, the 75-yard bomb. How did that end up working out?
Yeah, so the Vikings run 2 different route concepts. On the left side of the field with Adam Thielen and Dalvin Cook, you've got David Morgan blocking. You've got what's called a drive concept. So you've got a deep square in from Adam Thielen, and you've got a shallow in from Dalvin Cook. They're both running in the same direction, about 15 yards apart on the field. And so that's a pretty good zone coverage beater. It does a really good job if you've got a couple of underneath defenders kind of pulling one of those underneath defenders to one of the receivers, usually the running back because they can see him, and leaving Adam Thielen wide open would have been a great deep pass. But they were in man coverage, it looked like. And so on the other side, they ran something called Y cross, except instead of the Y, it was Treadwell instead of Kyle Rudolph. He crosses up the field. So he turns up field and he crosses up the field across the face of the single high safety. And that's supposed to drag the safety over to Treadwell because that's kind of what his read is. And that gives Stephon Diggs the room he needs to run a post, or a go or a corner, depending on what the safety leverage is. And because the safety turns outside, Diggs can kind of create additional room against the corner that he's already beating. And then his only job after that is to track the ball. And he did obviously a great job of that. Cousins placed it really well. And he just outran the defender, who I think it was Devon House was the defender. And he subbed in really quickly, and it kind of immediately they end up targeting him. I don't think they targeted Diggs because of the defender they had in there. I think it just worked out based on the coverage that they saw. But yeah, it was a really typical, maybe we're going to see a lot of this from John DeFilippo, a really typical zone beater on one side, man coverage beater on the other side, deep shot. That was just it was no matter what happened, unless it was a zone play and for some reason the underneath defender saw Thielen and moved up to him, you'd have to dump it off to Dalvin Cook and he'd have to generate yak. It was going to be a deep shot or a throwaway. And it was, a touchdown. So it worked out pretty well.
I'm trying to remember the last time I saw a Vikings quarterback do that since Favre, because we didn't see Ponder do it. I'm confident we didn't see Bradford do it. Well, it's not, especially not for 75 yards.
We did see was it a 72-yarder to Michael Jenkins from Ponder in his first game? He didn't start. No, it was his first start against the Green Bay Packers.
That might have been it.
Michael Jenkins was down a yard before the end zone.
Yeah. So it ended up, yeah. I'm just trying to remember like the last time I'd seen that, because it certainly wasn't Donovan McNabb, and it certainly wasn't.
Bridgewater and Keenum don't have the strength for that.
No.
Plus, it's a deep shot, so Bridgewater hasn't done it. But yeah. I mean, Keenum would like to do that. That's for sure.
I think Bridgewater threw a long bomb in a preseason game once, and that was the extent of it. So,
well, actually, maybe the best example was an incompletion. It was a deep shot opening against San Francisco to Mike Wallace. It was a really excellent throw. Ends up right in Mike Wallace's breadbasket, and just like how Ben Gedeon's DPI wasn't called as DPI, whoever was covering Mike Williams. Not Mike Williams. Mike Wallace. Whoever was covering Mike Wallace, commits DPI and it wasn't called. But it should have been a catch, and that was a really great deep shot to Mike Wallace to like open the season. So, yeah, Bridgewater does have one regular season version of that. It wasn't a completion though, so I don't know how much we can count it.
Yeah. But in any case, it was a fantastic throw. And if we're going to talk about fantastic throws, we also have to talk about the Thielen, the catch by Thielen, the throw by Cousins, that I'm still not entirely sure how the hell that was ended up turning into a touchdown. Like, that was the smallest of possible windows on that play.
Yeah, that was an insanely small window. Like, the guts that it took to throw, the velocity that you needed, and it is incredible.
That is what you expect when you pay a man this amount of money to be quarterbacking your team. Like that sort of excellence, but then I start to sound like Matt Khalil, so let's not go there. It's that sort of like ability, that sort of luck, that sort of quarterback play you expect for that sort of money, and we've had 2 games in a row now where there's been some play where you have to sit back on Twitter or YouTube or whatever and just go, how the hell did he do that?
Yeah, it was incredible. There's no other way to put it. It's a switch concept. I actually asked Adam Thielen about this. I was like, hey, it looks like you ran a switch concept, which, typically it's pretty good against man coverage. But, there was a safety up top. I wanted to know if there was something that you saw in the way the Packers were organizing their defense that made it seem like it was pretty good, or if this is just kind of, and he was like, no, it's just in the game plan. We ran it a couple of times throughout training camp. It's just kind of in our playbook. It wasn't because of an in-game adjustment, or it wasn't because of something, special that we saw in film. This is just a play that we have. So the switch concept, it's kind of what it sounds like. You've got 2 receivers lined up next to each other, in this case, Diggs and Thielen. They both run upfield, and at one point, they switch positions, like they cross each other's routes. And so Thielen ends up running a corner, even though he started on the inside, and Diggs runs a post, essentially, even though he started on the outside, and they switch. I think switch concept is when they switch earlier, and scissors concept is when they switch later. Either way, this can create rub routes or rubs against the man coverage defender. You can create a pick and get open, although that's kind of not always the case. It confuses the read for the safety, who was kind of a step late. But really, the schematic whatever of it is a lot less important than the skill it took Thielen to get open, and much, much, much more importantly, the skill and talent it took for Cousins to get the ball in there for a touchdown. It's one of the best throws I've ever seen. It was phenomenal.
Yeah, and just having the wherewithal to just be able to get into the end zone at that point. Just, okay, one more twist or whatever, just like being able to get in there was important on that. And I want to thank Cousins for that, because that also meant that I was able to defeat Don from Ohio in fantasy, especially after all the crap he'd been giving me over the past literal year. So shout out to Kirk Cousins for helping make my dream come true.
I knew that was going to end up in the show somewhere.
Yeah, there will be more coming, I imagine. I just like beating Don from Ohio at anything, really. Yeah. So the defense ended up getting to Favre eventually, but the special teams, boy, that's a whole other mess. especially from the blocked punt and everything else. It's not like this is the first game where we've seen special teams be an issue. We saw special teams being an issue literally the entire preseason. So Mike Zimmer has said that they are really going to hammer on special teams. What exactly does that entail?
I don't know what the solution is at this point. So the special teams has consistently been an issue. It really felt like a lot of the issues that cropped up in the preseason were really more issues of players that didn't know their assignment or didn't know what to do on special teams. So you had Holton Hill making a couple of mistakes on special teams, leading to huge, punt returns by like Isaiah McKenzie or whoever, right? And then, you had, and that, that was on punt coverage. You saw kind of mistake here or there on the kickoff. And, those just seem like player problems localized to a number of players that are maybe not great special teamers. But in this game, we saw, kind of the punt block return touchdown, which was a product of a miscommunication or a misidentification between Eric Wilson and Anthony Harris. Well, I think that's what it was. I think Anthony Harris, when the punt team saw, what's his name, Tramon Williams or whoever, move out of the jamming position into a rush position, Anthony Harris should have kind of adjusted what his protection call was. And so I think the reason Eric Wilson blocked the outside rusher instead of the inside rusher, because typically you want to block the inside rusher, I think the reason he blocked the outside rusher is because he expected Anthony Harris to come in and take on that inside rusher, because now you've got 4 players to the left of the long snapper on the punt team and 3 players to the right of the long snapper on the punt team. And those 4 players are blocking 3 punt rushers, whereas the three on the right of the long snapper are blocking 4 punt rushers. So you just got a guy doing nothing, even though you've got all the numbers you need to block everybody up. And, in punt block situations, you don't have to block for very long. So you just kind of needed someone to get in the way. And so I think that was a problem on Anthony Harris's part. I'm not sure. I had him in the locker room too. I should have asked him. That's an issue, right? Like, there needs to be more communication among the special teams units about what to do in that situation. Almost always when you've got a play dialed up like that, there's something you see on film. So the Packers probably saw something that obviously they ended up taking advantage of. And that's an issue, right? The punting after that was really good. Really good, actually. But we saw some unusual stuff. I kind of want to know what happened on that weird kickoff that I think led to a field goal, if that was intentional or not. I guess they missed some kicks too. Yeah. But I guess they missed some field goals.
Yeah, let's move on to some hard-hitting kicker analysis here. So he missed 3 field goals, 2 of which would have been game-winning, leading to a tie. He was subsequently released. What have we learned from his stint in Minnesota?
Don't draft kickers? I don't know.
That's it's, you feel bad for the kid because he's a kid in the league. He's as pure a rookie as you're going to find in the league, and it's just it's rough. And social media does not make this any easier. You know, terrible people who are out there being terrible online on Twitter, like. Obviously not necessary, but dudes in the interview in the locker room, and this is really what struck me. And I'll credit Andy Carlson for
Andy's the one who kind of pounded this home.
Yeah, it was like he had mentioned that he had missed that last kick because of a lack of confidence. And if that's your situation, this is not the place for you. This is not, the stakes are slightly higher in this particular instance. So like, you feel bad for him on a certain extent, and it's not like he retired at halftime. Let us be clear. He continued playing despite the miss, but this was still pretty rough.
Yeah. So the issue I have is not So I'm a little less vociferous about this than Andy is, because Andy was very clear. Like, if you're ever in that situation and you're a kicker, then you can't be in the league. Which there's definitely a huge element of truth to that. I'm not going to say it's not wrong. And Andy wasn't saying you can never be in the league. Like, I'm sure if you talk to like a sports psychologist, is like find a way to get around it if you can. That's fine. To Andy, but. First of all, I kind of want to give him props for admitting that. Like, I think it takes a lot to say that when you know kind of how kickers are evaluated and what everyone's perception of what a kicker is. I know at least one person mentioned that if that's the case, you shouldn't have asked for a kick, which I don't think that makes sense, because there's kind of like an internal, like, can I do this? And then the way you resolve that is by being externally confident. You can kind of trick yourself into being confident, so you can't just like say, well, I don't know if I can make it. Plus that you definitely get cut if that's the like, I don't know if you can rely on me for this game-winning field goal against a division rival, but you probably just try and get that touchdown. Like,
Zimmer has put people in that situation before. I mean, like, instead of kicking the extra point or instead of going for the field goal, they end up going for it on fourth down as a signal to your kicker, like, "Hey, get your stuff in gear. Get all your. It's the Rick and Morty thing. Get all your stuff, put it in a little bag, and get it together. Take it to the store. Like, we're waiting for you to get your things together so we can, move on as a team here."
Yeah. It was interesting because he sends the signal in the preseason, but during the regular season, he turns to the kicker, and that makes sense, right? Like, the preseason is kind of when you do stuff to signal and coach and all that. In the regular season, you're like trying to friggin' win games, and so he thinks it's the highest point value possibility. And I'm kind of like, so to shift discussions to like Zimmer. There's a bunch of people who like criticized his end of game management there, and just, quote unquote, settling for a field goal. And I'm kind of in between, right? Like, I think the Vikings should organize that drive with a field goal in mind, but not as the only goal, right? And so they should have taken a couple of shots into the end zone, especially kind of given the kicker situation, right? You missed a couple in the preseason. It's not like this is the first time he missed a kick for the Vikings, right? He missed a couple in the preseason, and then, you go into this game and you've got 2 missed kicks in a row. So you try to like get some insurance and go to the end zone, and they wasted a lot of clock time and they didn't take shots into the end zone. And I kind of agree with all of that. But there's definitely a lot of people who think you shouldn't have attempted for a field goal at all. And not knowing kind of the situation where the kicker might not be confident. I don't think that that's fair either, because the highest value proposition is a field goal. And the last thing you want is a turnover and give them the ball with a minute left. And so you can't be too aggressive trying to get that touchdown either. They did everything that the Priefer and the kicker wanted. They moved the ball to the middle of the field and all that. But yeah, they should have been a little bit more aggressive. I don't think that they should have gone into that drive with a touchdown in mind as the primary goal. I think once they kind of got close to the end zone, close to the red zone, they should have started taking some shots. But I don't think that I don't want to be overly critical. Like, I get why they did that. It makes a lot of sense. It's like very high, because you're not trying to maximize points. You're trying to get a point and win the game. So I get it. And I also get that like the 35-yard field goal it's a 35-yard field goal. Like, I'm not going to make it, right? Like, I'm not going to say 35-yard field goal, I can make it, but like 98% of the kickers in the league can, right? Especially now that like another one has been cut. This kind of reminds me of, I don't know if it's Red Right 88 or whatever. It's one of the famous Cleveland losses from like the late 80s, I think, maybe the mid 80s, where they decide to go for a touchdown instead of a field goal to try and win the game, even though a field goal would have won the game. And it was like they were like somewhere in the final 30 yards or whatever. And they decide to go for it instead of the field goal. And it's like famous, right? Because the play that they called might have been red right 88, or maybe I'm conflating two moments again. But he just misses, the quarterback just misses through the end zone, and they end up, I think, with a loss. And if they just kicked it and it went in, they would have won. And they were well within field goal range, but their kicker had missed the previous two field goals. They decided to go for a touchdown instead. Like the opposite has happened, and it's like famously so.
Yeah.
There's like more context, like the kicker made all his kicks in one direction but missed them all in the other direction. There's like a lot of wind and whatever, but still, like, the opposite has happened.
It would be, and if we would have thrown a pick because we're the Vikings, or if there would have been a fumble because this is the Vikings, or something along those lines, then, people would be picking apart that. Going, it was a terrible decision. He only missed 2 that day. You could have given him a third shot. So, like, either way, you were going to get.
Yeah, and it was a 48 and a 49 yarder, right? Yeah. Like, they're not automatic. Like, those are the ones that he missed. Like, you probably should make at least one of those two, but like. It's not the same as, like, if he had missed a 20-yarder, I would be of a different mind heading into that drive.
Yeah. If that were the case, then they probably would have continued to press on. And while they were going, I'd just go, okay, great. We're going to be in a position where we're going to end up missing a field goal. That's going to be what ends up happening. And then it does. I'm just sitting there just going, I need to remember to use my powers for good instead of evil. I just need to remember that moving forward. So while we are talking about the kicker situation, let's talk about Dan Bailey, who I'm convinced is a cartoon character and not, in fact, a football player. So Dan Bailey has signed. He has signed with the Vikings. He is expected to be our new kicker. He used to be a member of the Cowboys. And was it the Ravens that cut him this offseason?
No, it was just the Cowboys.
It was just the Cowboys. I thought he had had another stint over the summer. So Dan Bailey, one of the most accurate kickers in all of football, had not the best season last year. What do we know about the decision-making process for either Dan Bailey or the Vikings?
Well, I think so. This is actually, it's a good way to word the question. This is actually pretty interesting. So Dan Bailey had offers from apparently 4 other teams, according to Darren Wolfson, and then later confirmed by people at the NFL Network. I think Ian Rappaport. And the offers he got were like $3 million offers, $3 million a year offers for multiple years, guaranteed. And he turned them down because he was kind of looking for the right fit, the right situation. The Vikings, it turns out, are a very good situation, right? Because they're going to be in a position where they could win the Super Bowl. They kick in a dome. Like, I mean, that's pretty great for a kicker. And he's only 30. Like, for a kicker, like, he may have 10 more years left in him, right? So, for him to be able to kind of set up the rest of his career with a good season here, that's pretty smart. And it was kind of interesting that he decided to wait it out. Apparently the Browns may have also contacted him. That's kind of the opposite situation. You've got wind coming in from the lake. It's an outdoor stadium. It's a notoriously windy stadium, and the Browns are like not going to win the Super Bowl this year. Dude, that's another halftime take that I'm sure I'm just going to get blasted on later if they win the Super Bowl this year. Yeah. Crap. But yeah, so, he ends up finding a situation that he thinks really works for him. And that's the Vikings. And he takes half the amount of money that other teams were offering for a 1-year deal instead of a multi-year deal. And so he turns down, maybe $6, maybe $9 million guaranteed for $1.5 million because he really thinks the situation's best for him. And again, it might maximize his money in the long run. For the Vikings, they have to kind of take a couple of things into consideration. The first is that Bailey's coming off of the worst year of his career. He hit at 75%, which I think field goal percentage by itself is a pretty poor statistic because it doesn't adjust for distance. But he missed a 30 to 35 yarder, which he had made all of them, I think, before last year. He missed one at basically every 10 chunk unit of distance, right? He missed a 30 plus yarder or 40 plus yarder and a couple of 50 plus yarders. Plus, he missed 2 extra points for the first time in his career. That's weird to think about. But there's kind of 2 things to keep in mind. The first is specific to the situation. So Bailey had multiple injuries. He had a sports hernia injury, which is typically like an abdominal injury, and he had a groin injury. And that he was injured for a good chunk of the year. They got Mike Nugent in to kick in his stead. And when he came back from injury, he was perfect before then. Like, he hadn't missed a kick, he hadn't missed a field goal, he hadn't missed an extra point. He comes back. And he immediately, like, he misses a field goal, he misses an extra point for the first time in his career, and then for that final month, where I think he played 5 games in the final month of the season, he ends up missing 5 field goals and 2 extra points, and so he feels fully healthy. Obviously, according to him, he passed a physical with the Vikings in order to sign that, and apparently he actually looked really good throughout camp. The only thing is, they apparently cut him. According to Jerry Jones, they cut him because he cost $3.5 million, and the kicker they have costs like $500,000. So they saved $3 million against the cap. They have a lot of cap room, so that doesn't quite make sense. Plus, like, when has Jerry ever like restrained spending money?
Yeah, so it's not like the Des Bryant situation was made purely to save some money on it.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And so, I think the Cowboys might have just been, they just want to get rid of the bad juju from the last year. So they just got a new kicker. But yeah, apparently he'd been looking really good throughout camp, and that he'd been healthy, and that he was kind of kicking at the same, essentially, pace that he'd been kicking at. So those are all things to take into consideration. The second thing I want to mention is there's this interesting tweet. I haven't seen the research yet, but I trust this guy, Cole_Cav. He writes, about football from an analytics perspective, I think, for like RotoViz or whatever. And he mentions in a tweet, which I should probably find, that the highest value proposition in finding a kicker for an individual team, obviously this doesn't work once you like universalize it and like try to create a league-wide model. But for an individual team, if you have the choice, the best option available to you is to find a veteran kicker who's been really good throughout his career and was cut after a bad season. They tend to produce in the year after that. They tend to produce really well. They tend to produce like the top at their position. That's exactly what happened to Robbie Gould. He ended up turning into an elite kicker again. That's exactly the situation with Dan Bailey potentially.
And Matt Prater for the Lions as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and he's doing really well for the Lions. So yeah, it's statistically it's a sound decision given the specifics of the situation. Seems like a sound decision. I don't know where the money is coming from, but cool, that happened.
At this point, somebody's just rubbing their hands together and making magic happen, and we're just going to end up being okay with it. I had just read that he had signed for $2 million, so I'm not entirely sure where that's from, but good for him.
Yeah, there's only supposed to be $3 million in cap space, $700,000 more if you account for like the release of Stacey Cole, or $500,000 more if you account for the release of Stacey Coley. Which I guess is just enough to sign Tom Johnson at $1.5 million, but they also signed Aldrick Robinson for, I assume, not $0. So
they actually just signed him from a sandwich. It was like a sandwich and something from the deli at Hy-Vee. Like, he really wanted the potato salad, so we're gonna give him the potato salad. So you mentioned him. Tom Johnson has also signed back in. He had just done a stint in Seattle, if I remember correctly, from the preview show for about a month or so ago, right?
Yeah, so the Vikings essentially swapped defensive tackles, right? The Vikings got Sheldon Richardson, the Seahawks got Tom Johnson, and to make up for the difference in talent between the two, I guess they also got Shamar Stephen. I'm not sure. But yeah, Tom Johnson was cut by Seattle, not because they don't want him on the roster, evidently, but because like they had 3 injuries at linebacker and they were already thin at the position kind of entering the season, that they wanted to have a backup linebacker just available. And so they needed to create space. They decided to cut someone who they could sign back immediately after the week was over, and at least one of their linebackers had healed up. Yeah. For some reason, they chose like Tom Johnson and not like one of their fullbacks or whatever, right? Like Tom Johnson.
Yeah, that defense is just a gigantic hole, though. Slightly off topic, did you see the Monday Night Football graphic with Thanos and the snap?
Oh my, it was amazing. It's one of the best Monday Night Football graphics ever.
Look for that in the show notes. That was incredible.
Yeah, it was so good.
So Tom Johnson is on the team. Dan Bailey's on the team, and the new receiver as well.
Yeah, so Aldrick Robinson, who I suspect will play a Jarius Wright role, even though he mostly played a deep slot role at his previous 7 locations. So the nice thing, so obviously Dan Bailey is the starting kicker, right? Because you only got the one kicker, and these two are depth signings, and not necessarily signings where there's an immediate need, right? Because Stephon Diggs, Adam Thielen, they're fine, right? The question is kind of if you've got that third receiver and potentially he could compete for that spot. I don't know if he has the ability to compete for that spot right away. There's a reason he was available. Tom Johnson, he's a starting quality defensive tackle that the Vikings now have at depth at defensive tackle. They're going to have to get rid of someone to make room. A lot of people suggest David Perry. I don't know. There's a reason he was kind of kept on the roster. It's probably because of the nose tackle position he plays. I wouldn't be surprised if it was Jalen Holmes or one of the running backs, whatever. Aldrick Robinson, it's weird, right? Because the Vikings have been talking about, I think since 2014, essentially, finding a big-bodied receiver. And they don't have that, right? Adam Thielen is 6 feet tall. Stephon Diggs is 6 feet tall. The big-bodied receiver that they do have is 6'2", is Laquan Treadwell. They had Stacey Coley. He's obviously not a big-bodied receiver. Brandon Zylstra is not quite as tall. I think he's 6'2". But they didn't have a big-bodied receiver, and it just seems like the Vikings are just kind of we got enough. We got receivers, so that's good. And they're good receivers, right? So Aldrick Robinson is 5'9.5". Ran a 4.37, I want to say 4.35, 4.37. Super speedy guy. Not as reliable, I would say, as Jarius Wright, but probably plays the same role. Where you probably see him a lot on third downs because he can create some mismatches. The nice thing about him is that he's I think I mentioned on another radio show, he's a discount Deshaun Jackson, where I think you can probably line him up outside so long as you don't have him lined up directly on the line of scrimmage. You can probably line him up outside, definitely line him up in the slot, and that gives you a lot of flexibility because you can line all 3 of those receivers up in the slot or on the outside. And so you can just kind of pick and choose which matchup you like, and if you end up with, say, Josh Jackson again against Aldrick Robinson, Josh Jackson's a really good corner, but Aldrick Robinson runs a 4.35 and Josh Jackson runs a 4.55. And so you're just going to try and take that deep shot. Robinson also has some experience with Kirk Cousins. While Cousins was a backup in 2014 with Washington, Robinson was on the roster. So that probably plays a role too.
I like the idea of having a dollar store Deshaun Johnson or a Big Lots Deshaun Johnson.
Yeah.
That's what we need. Let's go to the mailbag here. I suppose you answered this already, but just want to make this clear. Eric Thompson asks, why does Arif hate Kirk Cousins so much? All these people in his mentions can't be wrong.
It's because I have hate in my heart.
Yep, and here I thought this was going to be the season of just of optimism for Arif. Peter Tieglin asks, can we treat this one as a success? It feels like we got away with one at Lambeau. It's poetic justice that Rogerizing, that's how I'm going to pronounce it, the passer call, is what allowed Cousins to keep the last drive alive. Also, if you haven't seen it, you should check out the documentary Harvard Beats Yale 29-29, which I have seen, and that's a fantastic one. I wonder if we feel like we got away with one simply, not necessarily because of the penalty. I don't think that had anything to do with it. I wonder if we feel like that just because we have the little brother syndrome to Green Bay, the constant we want to have the success that they've had before, and we've been beaten down for a while, and they've had such success, and meanwhile we've had some success but haven't been able to confidently walk into their house and beat them. Except for, the last game of last year. So,
right.
Do you think that has anything to do with it? Or do you feel like we should feel a little bit different after this tie? Was this tie really a victory?
Everson Griffin thinks it's a victory. It's his reasoning's kind of funny. I'll link it in the show notes.
I don't know if I would argue with the man in person.
Right. I don't think... So I think it's fine thinking of it kind of as a victory. I don't think it's because necessarily... like there's a little brother syndrome going on, because I think the Vikings have kind of established that they might be the best team in the NFC North. So there's no reason to really like think like that. And I think a lot of fans have incorporated that, where they think, actually the Vikings I think are the best. Aaron Rodgers, very good. I think the Vikings are the best, sort of thing. So I don't think there's a little brother aspect to thinking that this is like in some ways a win, right? Because the Vikings did play better, right? Like that's the only reason that you're in a situation like this is because you left, 9 points on the board and you allowed another 7 going the other way on special teams from scrimmage, the way football is meant to be played, and also where you're more likely to get, results that impact the final game. The Vikings, outplayed them, and you could say, to the tune of 16 points, maybe, if you were willing to talk some trash, I guess. Probably not quite 16, because, a good kicker might miss like one of the two 48, 49 yarders. But yeah, like, the Vikings essentially outplayed them to the tune of 16, 19 points. Maybe you take one of those kicks away because it would have ended overtime, or maybe you take both the kicks away because you made the kick earlier. But still, the Vikings outplayed the Packers, so you could probably count it as a win.
Yeah. Here's something scary. Kyle Segal has a question that's real, I guess. Kyle asks, it really feels like the defense has taken a step back from its height last year, despite being on paper even more stacked this year. What's the cause of that? Is it teams, quote, figuring us out? Did the Saints' halftime adjustment expose us somehow last year?
Nope. I'm not worried about it. I mean, it's the Packers, right? Like, they've got a good offense. They have a good offense every year. The Vikings did really, really well against San Francisco. The defense looked phenomenal. They allowed a couple of yards to George Kittle, and that's about it, right? They beat up on like one of the league's up and coming ingenues. So they look good there, and they allowed 29 points to the Packers. They allow 30 points on occasion to some teams, and they still led the league in points allowed. So I wouldn't say it's time to say, hey, the defense is looking worse somehow. Now, specific players, you can say, hey, Kendricks, hasn't had a good game yet. If we've got another game where it looks like that'll be a problem, we should talk about it. But I mean, I don't know that that's true for anyone else, actually. I think anyone who had a bad game against Green Bay on the defense, they probably had a good game against San Francisco. So you're not really in a situation where you're like, oh, there's this persistent problem here. So no, I don't think that there's a blueprint out there for the Vikings. I don't think that, the Vikings are somehow regressing in a big way. They, in fact, are generating turnovers at a higher rate than they did before. And they've got more depth than before. So, I'm not worried about it.
All right, next question. Kyle, take an antidepressant. We'll talk to you Sunday. Next question is from Seth, who asks, what does it take for the Vikings to move on from Priefer? Feel like he's lost touch. Let's link that in with the next question, which is from Matthew Cryer, who asks, quote, what the hell is Priefer doing? Between the kicking situation, the punt block for the touchdown, and seemingly trying everyone out at kick and punt returns, it seems like our special teams is single-handedly trying to lose us games.
Yeah, it's worth asking this question, right? Like, now that Priefer no longer has a generational kick returner 2 years in a row, or two kind of kick returners in a row, the issues with the rest of the special teams unit have like come to bear. Like the best punter the Vikings have had under the Priefer tenure was Kluwe, who got run out, right, by Priefer and also by Kluwe.
That really was a dual thing there.
And the best kicker they had was Ryan Longwell, which, I mean, like, neither of those were like Priefer acquisitions, right? Like, they were there and then Priefer arrived and then they got worse, which that's not necessarily his fault. With the Kluwe one, he's got an argument. And actually a pretty good one, even if it's like coming from a biased source. The Longwell one is just like, he got old. That happens. But yeah, they haven't adequately replaced them. They've gone through another long snapper. They've gone through a couple of punters. You got your Jeff Locks and your Ryan Quigleys, and now your Matt Wiles. They've gone through a couple of kickers. Your Blair Walshes and your Daniel Carlsons, and I guess your Dan Baileys. That's an issue, right? Marcus Sherrills, I think he's a 2010 walk-on, so I think he was with Priefer the whole time. When he hasn't been in there, the Vikings have had some issues with their punt returns. Now that like Holton Hill / Mike Hughes, maybe they can kind of resolve that. But Chad Beebe couldn't really do it in the preseason. The times we saw Adam Thielen do it, like in the Dallas game, that didn't look very good. Didn't look very good. I mean, he fumbled. The punt coverage, it's weird, right? Because like the past couple of years, we've been like, wow, the Vikings have incredible punt gunners. And they did for a very long time. I feel like if it's that consistent for that long, you could say that probably has something to do with the coaching. But this year that's not happening. The kickoff coverage is whatever. I feel like he does a really poor job of selecting specialists and or coaching specialists when they've been selected. And that's important. That has an outsized role on the performance of the special teams. I do think that generally speaking, and I'll probably look up like how many punt block touchdowns or punt return touchdowns have you allowed. I think that generally speaking, the other elements have actually been positive over his career, like punt coverage, and so on. So maybe, but like the specialists have gotten, I think he does a poor job with specialists. I don't know yet if he does a poor job or if this is just an unusually poor crop of special teamers.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. It's just very odd that all the chickens seem to be coming home to roost on this one. Kyle Slaby asks, with Coley gone and Robinson just arriving, does Zylstra become wide receiver 3 or is Treadwell still the guy? Also, how many games until Dan Bailey loses us a game?
Next week's Buffalo, right? So not that.
Probably. If Dan Bailey causes us to lose the Buffalo game, it's going to be because, to win. Yeah, it's going to be because he like shanked a kick, it like dislodged something, and like a lighting rig falls on the entire Vikings team. Like right. that would count as a way Dan Bailey could lose us the Buffalo game. Not confident that Buffalo team isn't like some Division II like NCAA team this year.
So I asked a couple of people about this. So most of the people that I talked to were like very adamant about this. Your Alabama can't beat the worst NFL team. They couldn't beat the 016 Browns. Right. They couldn't beat the 016 Lions. I talked to a couple of people like, okay, but what's the line for this Buffalo team against Alabama? And this is one of the best Alabama teams we've ever seen, right? Because they have an offense now and the defense is still spectacular. And someone was like, oh my God, maybe Buffalo only wins by 14, which is like an enormous thing for them to say. Like, this Buffalo team is awful.
I like the idea. I like the idea of like it being 13. Like, yeah, I think the line would be 13.5. I think that would be an appropriate line for that. Like, wow, really? Mm.
Yeah, some of these dudes are like 28 and not 18. Like, that's insane.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk about that next week.
All right. Alex Goebel asks, it seems as though the Vikings are using a traditional approach to their running back rotation, with Dalvin Cook getting the lion's share of carries, with Latavius simply being used to spell him. Should Minnesota utilize something closer to a 50-50 carry split during the first half of the game and then allow Dalvin to take advantage of the tired defense in the second half? Should the NFL in general be more open to non-traditional rotations? I remember specifically Adrian Peterson being a good closer for a couple of years there, where he would end up getting a 50-50 for a little bit, and then he would end up just taking over in the last half of game. So something similar to that is what Alex Goebel is suggesting here.
Yeah, maybe. The only issue I have with that is that if you do think that there's value in running the ball and in specifically having Dalvin run the ball over Latavius, if you think he provides, net value, you could be in a situation where Dalvin just doesn't get the ball in the fourth quarter because you're playing catch up or whatever. Plus, like, if you're grinding out the clock, I actually might prefer Latavius Murray, who, despite those preseason fumbles or San Francisco fumbles, no, they were preseason fumbles, has remarkable ball security, whereas I think Dalvin Cook has more questions about his ball security. I'd actually rather have Latavius Murray close out and only have Dalvin Cook in for high leverage situations with Latavius Murray kind of rotating in to spell him. I think that the idea of like, if there's value in the running game, and if that value can be expressed properly in the difference between the two running backs, I would not reserve Dalvin Cook for low leverage situations, because then you're eliminating kind of the efficiencies you gain by having him. Yeah. So I would rather. I mean, I'd be fine starting the game with like Latavius Murray, right? Because that's a low leverage situation, just like the first drive or whatever. But you can't do that because then he's not, the capital S starter. But I'm fine with that schematically. And I'm fine with like non-traditional approaches from that perspective. But I don't want to say 50-50 until late in the game, because when you're late in the game, like there's like three options, right? The game is close, in which case, great, use them. The game is out of hand, and if you're losing, use the other guy. Don't waste Dalvin Cook. And if you're winning, you're not going to use either of them. So really, it's only if the game is close. And so I'd rather just kind of take care of that in the middle of the game and have him in higher leverage situations. So I don't quite agree. And also Adrian Peterson was definitely like a different kind of, like, there's a reason he was a phenomenal closer. It's because he just hurt people all the time.
Yeah. Every time he'd get up, he'd just be shaking everyone's hands, and then they wouldn't be able to tackle him. It was
yeah.
It's what's going to get him in the Hall of Fame, quite frankly. Jacob Cost asks, how much of a liability is Mike McCarthy to the Green Bay Packers? Believe he would be referring to the wonderful, I'm not necessarily being sarcastic here. Yeah, it's sarcastic. The wonderful clock management that the Packers showed, where we didn't even need a timeout in order to stop the clock twice on one of the last plays, or one of the last drives, rather, of the fourth quarter. So how much of a liability is Mike McCarthy to the Green Bay Packers?
I would venture to guess that if you replaced Mike McCarthy with a league average head coach, the Packers would have won another Super Bowl by now. And you probably like half a win to a win over the course of a season, which is like a ton versus like an average coach. So yeah, it cost him a ring, I guess, according to my analysis. So yeah, he sucks.
There are coaches in this league that are given an unfair amount of praise because they won a ring. And even if they haven't won a ring, they have spent a lifetime in that position, or what feels like a lifetime to most fans. So McCarthy ends up being, like, I say, a victim of that, but Mike McCarthy is a part of that, where he's been in the league for a number of years. He has a ring. It feels like he should have had more, considering who his quarterbacks have been. And when he does finally leave Green Bay, some other team is going to sit there and want to pay him a ridiculous amount of money to come out of retirement because, hey, he's got that championship pedigree. He did all of these great things in Green Bay. He was employed there for so long. It's kind of like the Andy Reid situation, where Andy Reid was a coach and for the Eagles for a number of years, was out for a little while, and then goes to Kansas City, and it's a repeat of all of his greatest hits. Like all of them, all of his clock management, all of his questionable like life choices. It's all here, and it's all black and white. You know what these people are when they go. I just can't. I wonder which team he's going to end up going to after he ends up leaving Green Bay.
That's interesting. Miami,
Arizona.
That was one of my choices.
Ooh,
all right, excellent.
It's not like Arizona could get much worse. Have you watched any of the Arizona stuff the last 2 weeks?
Rough. I think Sam Bradford's better than that. I think this is a coaching problem. This is a coaching problem.
I don't know what it is. I just know that defense is atrocious, and that offense isn't much better either. Let's move on to Ian, who asks, which Vikings Twitter personality would you have the most faith in to hit from 35 for the win? And who would you have the least amount of faith in?
Oh, I definitely have faith in Eric, right? He plays soccer, so...
Eric's
there's
possible.
that.
I think Drew actually posted a video. Was it Drew or was it somebody else that had posted a video of him actually hitting 35 yards?
Yeah, but I mean, it's not a game situation. Like, as if I have the luxury to pick between the members of Vikings Twitter who have kicked a field goal in an NFL game.
There are so many.
If only Cluey was a member of Vikings Twitter, not just like a member of Twitter, because obviously he would be the answer.
I could see that.
Yeah, I mean, well, he also plays soccer, and he played one of the specialist positions. I assume, like by osmosis, he grabbed enough about the other specialist position to.
Some team, whether in high school or college, was like, "Can you kick this? We just need a field goal right now, please."
Well, I think he did both in high school. So yeah, there you go. But we can't count him. Plus, that would be way too easy and no fun. I'm going to go with Eric Thompson. Shouts to Drew or whoever it was for posting a couple of 35-yard field goal kicks. Who do I have the least faith in? Besides me, Daniel House. Sorry, Daniel.
Wow, I thought it was going to be Ben Natan just to like.
Well, he's not Vikings Twitter. He's Eagles Twitter.
I suppose. Well, yeah. He'd 38-7 on his way out of there. So.
Right. Yeah.
Ugh. Don from Ohio asks, does James really feel good about beating me in fantasy football the way he did? Absolutely. 100% yes. Very yes. More yes than I can possibly, like... It would be different if he hadn't have spent, like, the majority of the morning, like, by, like, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So, like, 1/4 of play is done. Posting all these updates of him like beating me by 20 points, and then I,
my god,
like, that was the thing. I'm just like, really?
My god,
it's literally 1 o'clock. All but one of my players are going to be playing by the late game in the afternoon. This isn't really. You're starting Kyle Sloter. You're going to lose. So yes, I feel wonderful, elated. I need a thesaurus out here. I feel all sorts of wonderful things about beating Don from Ohio in fantasy. So yes, it was a life moment that I will treasure forever, quite frankly. That is going to be it for this episode. We will be back later in the week to talk about the upcoming Buffalo game. So check us out there. Arif, what do you got to plug?
Yeah, so like I said, I've got the Athletic article of breaking down every touchdown that was scored against and for the Vikings in that game. A lot of interesting schematic stuff from both teams that I think kind of reveal the tendencies, especially for the Vikings offensively and defensively.
Very good. So go ahead and check that out at theathletic.com. That is going to be it for this episode. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening, and please remember to tweet that. And we will see you later this week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and co-host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at Norse Code DN. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can also be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.